On our broadcast tonight, fresh charges on the crew members of the sunken Korean ferry. The captain and 3 crew members have been indicted on charges of manslaughter. If convicted, they could face life imprisonment. Candidate registrations for the upcoming June 4th local elections kick off on this Thursday. Politicians will hit the campaign trail starting next Thursday. And Japan is looking to beef up its pacifist rules of engagement in a controversial move its prime minister hopes will allow its armed forces to enter battle in defense of allies. Early edition begins now.
I see trees of green, red
늘 남편 먼저,
I see them
늘 자식 먼저.
for me and
레이디 퍼스트라는 말을 믿고 살아온 당신. 오늘만큼은 세상 누구보다 당신이 먼저입니다.
한 분 한 분 특별하게 모시겠습니다.
Excellence in Flight, Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in New York, noon in Ankara, and 6 on a Thursday evening here in Seoul. This is Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. A month has passed since the sinking of the Sewolho ferry, and the number of missing now stands at 20, as 3 more bodies have been recovered today.
Now, in the criminal investigation, the captain and 3 senior crew members of the sunken ferry have been indicted on charges of involuntary manslaughter. Arirang News Kwon So-ah has the latest on this developing story.
State prosecutors on Thursday indicted Sewolho ferry captain Lee Jun-seok and 3 other crew members on charges of involuntary manslaughter. They say the 4 fled the ill-fated ferry without first evacuating hundreds of passengers on board and also calling them to remain in their cabins. Prosecutors say some of the crew confessed that they did not attempt to save passengers because they themselves wanted to survive. If found guilty, they could face a maximum penalty of life in prison or even the death penalty. At the Gwangju District Court in the south of the country, the prosecutors also indicted 11 other crew members for negligence of duty and violation of maritime law, which stipulates they should have been the last to leave the ship. Instead, they also escaped from the ferry as soon as they realized that water levels were rising. They are also accused of changing out of their uniforms during the rescue operation, making it difficult for the Coast Guard to distinguish them from passengers. Prosecutors are also putting more pressure on Yoo Byung-on, the practical owner of the Sewolho ferry's operator. He's been called in for questioning this Friday and is currently believed to be holed up inside a religious facility in Anseong, Gyeonggi-do province, where members of the so-called Salvation sect, which was founded by the Yoo family, are gathering in big numbers and blocking the gates to the facility. They made a statement in the afternoon denouncing authorities for associating their religion with the Sewolho tragedy and infringing upon their religious rights. They also questioned why the Coast Guard and their rescue response to the disaster are not being investigated. The sect has been under fire for weeks as it is accused of being involved in the Yoo family's wrongdoings and because some of the Sewolho crew are members of the cult. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
In a little under 3 weeks' time, Koreans will head to the polls to cast their ballots in the June 4th local elections.
Campaigning is about to kick into high gear, but this election, unlike ones in years gone by, will be far less spirited as the nation continues to mourn the hundreds of people who lost their lives in the Sewolho ferry disaster. Our Kim Young-gil reports.
The ruling Saenuri Party's Election Management Committee held its first meeting on Thursday to discuss its strategy for the upcoming local elections. The committee's chairman Lee Wang-gu said campaigns under the Saenuri Party banner will be toned down this year in light of the Sewolho ferry tragedy.
The whole election process will focus on reinforcing the country's safety measures. Our Election Management Committee will devise plans to help the families of Sewolho ferry disaster victims. Election campaigns will be carried out in the most humble way possible.
Candidates in the local races are registering this Thursday and Friday. The incumbent mayor of Incheon, Song Young-gil of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy was one of the first to show up at the National Election Commission headquarters in Incheon on Thursday morning to make his candidacy official. 새누리 lawmaker Nam Kyung-pil resigned from his seat on Thursday and announced he was running for the governorship of Gyeonggi-do province. All the candidates will be allowed to start campaigning next Thursday on May 22nd. For the first time in Korean local election history, people will be able to cast their ballots before voting day on June 4th. Early voting will be held on May 30th and the 31st. The outcome of the nationwide election is being regarded as a litmus test for the Park Geun-hye administration, which entered its second year in February. We will have to wait for the results on election day to see which political party earns the trust of the people to institute change. Jimyoung-gil, Arirang News.
Senior diplomats from Korea and Japan held their second round of talks today in Tokyo on Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. Since the first meeting last month, Korean officials have been holding consultations with the victims.
Right. Tokyo claims the issue was settled through a 1965 treaty when the two countries normalized diplomatic ties, but Seoul is demanding an official apology and legal compensation from Japan for the so-called comfort women. More than 200,000 women, mostly Koreans, were forced to serve the Japanese military at comfort stations in the early 20th century. Meanwhile, by the end of the hour, hopefully, we'll know whether Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe plans to accept a proposal to lift a decades-long ban on his nation's right to collective self-defense. Abe's key security policy advisory panel publicized its final report on this topic earlier this Thursday.
It calls for a drastic change to Japan's post-war security framework and would allow the country's military to come to the aid of a neighboring country under attack. Observers say Japan is eager to reinterpret its constitution to deter Chinese expansionism, especially in regard to a set of disputed islands known as Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China.
So, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's hand-picked panel announcing its findings on Japan's constitutional reform. Now, observers have been calling it a reinterpretation of its constitution so its troops could use force to defend other countries for the first time in the post-World War II era.
Now let's try to get an analysis of what this means and what implications it would have in the Northeast Asian region. And for that, Dr. Dean Chang joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Dean is a senior researcher of Asian studies at the Heritage Foundation.
Dean, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, there have been talks that the proposal will set the stage for Prime Minister Abe's push to allow the military to play a greater role in international security. What is the nature of this debate that we're seeing?
Well, what is going on is that the changing circumstances in Northeast Asia, and in particular, North Korea's recent missile tests and the possibility of yet another nuclear test, as well as China's expanding military capabilities typified in both the South and East China Seas, is really changing the circumstances of Japanese defense. And it is basically forcing Tokyo to reconsider what minimum defense requirements really mean.
Well, Dean, some view this as a huge step, as a collective self-defense probably goes even further than all the other reinterpretations that Article 9 has seen thus far. So how radical a change will this mean for the Japanese defense policy?
I think that when we look at the context of the change, it is huge. The Japanese government has consistently said since the 1950s that Japan has the right to collective self-defense, but would not exercise that right. And now, for the first time, it is opening the door to actually exercise it. This does reflect, again, how radically the overall circumstances have changed, that Tokyo would take such a, frankly, huge, enormous step.
Right. So Japanese Prime Minister's push to build up its military, of course. Now, this will, I believe, that it will have an effect on the security relations between South Korea and Japan, North Korea and Japan, and of course, China-Japan relations and the way U.S. kind of fits in there as well. So what is your view on that?
Well, you've hit on all the major players here. North Korea has already threatened Japan should the Japanese government go through with this change. The Chinese have already made very clear that they're not very happy with Prime Minister Abe or Japan in general. So all this is going to do is just pour gasoline on the fire. The real issue is going to be between South Korea and Japan, both of which, of course, are allies of the United States. And President Obama, during his recent visit, really did push very hard to get Prime Minister Abe and President Park to have at least a cordial conversation with each other. The part of the argument here for this comprehensive change is the hope for greater defense cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo.
Now, senior diplomats from Korea and Japan are in their second round of talks on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. Do we expect the two sides to narrow their differences this time?
We would really hope that the two sides would be able to draw closer. This is a huge issue that divides two countries that are linked closely by economics and by mutual security concerns. But I fear that the reality is that this is a huge gulf, and realistically, you're only probably going to see some very minor movement on both sides, if any at all.
So to wrap things up, Dean, what is your short-term to longer-term forecast of the climate of change, or the climate, political, diplomatic climate here in Northeast Asia?
I think we are looking at very rough times ahead. I think that the Chinese actions in the South China Sea are going to presage significant efforts to expand their role in the East China Sea, which will affect both Japan and South Korea. I think North Korea is almost certainly going to be doing provocations, even if there wasn't this change in Japan, much less if there is one. And overall, I think that the region is due for some really rough weather.
Okay, Dr. Dean Chang, thank you so much for making time for us. It must be a very inconvenient hour over there in Washington, but thank you so much for sacrificing your beauty sleep to be here with us. We look forward to having you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life, talking with you on air and online, connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
The violence against foreign-owned factories is spreading quickly in Vietnam and took a deadly turn this Thursday. Officials are now saying that one Chinese worker was killed and scores more injured when hundreds of Vietnamese demonstrators went on a rampage in a factory in the central part of that country. The explosion of violence, initially centered outside the southern metropolis of Ho Chi Minh City, reflect a growing animosity in the region. Now, China works to solidify its claims over vast parts of two seas that other nations have long considered their own. However, we're also getting reports of damages at some 50 Korean-owned properties at the complexes. Demonstrators have there indiscriminately set factories on fire. Now, rescuers are hunting desperately for scores of Turkish coal miners still missing after an explosion caused a pit to collapse, killing nearly 300 people. Our Shin Se-min reports on the worst mining accident in that country's history.
The Turkish government is facing mounting criticism over what has become the nation's deadliest mining disaster. Protests have broken out in parts of the country, with demonstrators voicing their anger over the government's failure to improve mine safety and Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's move to privatize the mining sector. Police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse protesters in Istanbul who tried to march on the country's energy ministry. Turkey's major trade unions have joined in, calling a one-day strike. Prime Minister Erdogan, while visiting the accident site in Soma, tried to defend his government by pointing out that such disasters occur everywhere.
Such mine accidents do not happen only in Turkey. It happens in many countries, and many people died in such coal mine accidents. Our country is in a much better position.
The disaster has given fuel to an already outraged segment of the Turkish population, upset over corruption allegations surrounding the prime minister and those closest to him. The death toll from the mining accident has topped 270 and looks sure to rise even further. No survivors have surfaced since early Wednesday. Government officials say about 120 workers remain trapped in the mine some 2 kilometers underground. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories, a jury in the United States has ordered Korean auto giant Hyundai Motor to pay damages of well over $200 million after finding that a defect in one of its cars caused a head-on smash that killed 2 teenagers back in 2011. But Hyundai says it will appeal. Our Connie Kim has more.
A jury in the U.S. state of Montana has ordered Hyundai Motor to pay a staggering $248 million in punitive damages over a manufacturing defect in a Hyundai vehicle that caused a deadly car accident 3 years ago. The jury also ordered that of the total, Hyundai pay $8.6 million in damages to the families of the 2 teenagers that died in the July 2011 crash. The verdict says a defective steering knuckle in the Hyundai Tiburon caused it to suddenly veer into an oncoming lane, where it crashed head-on with another automobile. The maximum cap for steering knuckle defects stands at $10 million, but a judge in the state ruled the amount is not high enough to deter future wrongdoings by super-wealthy multinational firms. In 2005, Hyundai Motor recalled 111 Tiburons manufactured over a 1-month period that year due to steering issues, but it's unclear if the Hyundai model involved in the 2011 crash had been made during that time. Hyundai Motor has called the damage award outrageous and says it will appeal. It argues that a firecracker set off inside the vehicle might have caused the crash. Eyewitnesses say they saw a firework explode in the car prior to the accident, but police say they found no evidence to suggest the explosion. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Well, here in Korea, home to some of the world's most tech-savvy consumers, 8 out of 10 people use their smartphones to do some of their banking. The Bank of Korea says that the number of smartphone banking users stood at over 40 million as of the end of March. That's up 8.5% from the end of last year. It's been less than 5 years since the service was first introduced. The average amount of money moved around daily on smartphones in the first quarter of this year stood at around $1.5 billion. That, however, makes up only 4.5% of internet banking because the service is mainly used for small sum transactions. Although Korean consumers go plastic more often than anywhere else around the world, they're reliant on fewer cards these days, apparently. The Financial Supervisory Service says the number of credit cards held per person came to 3.9 on average last year. It's the first time since 2007 that the figure has dipped below 4. The financial watchdog attributed the drop to an increase in the number of debit cards issued and recent leaks of personal data. Debit cards, in fact, seem to be filling the vacuum. Total spending on debit cards is expected to top $88 billion this year.
Now, today is Teachers' Day here in Korea, which is a day for students and graduates to show their respect and gratitude to their teachers. Normally, the day is filled with festive events, but this year it won't be celebrated in quite the same way, as our Song Ji-sun reports.
They serve as our instructors, confidants, and counselors, and are in some cases as important as a parent, because a good teacher can change our lives. In honor of them, over 100 countries celebrate Teachers' Day. About a fifth of them do so on World Teachers' Day on October 5th. But here in Korea, it's celebrated on May 15th, the birthday of King Sejong, who invented the Korean alphabet. Teachers' Day was started over 5 decades ago by young members of Korea's Red Cross who volunteered to visit their teachers who are retired or had fallen ill. More than 50 years later, students today give carnations to their teachers in the same way they give them to their parents 1 week earlier. It's a less than subtle nod to the importance of the teachers and the roles they play.
The ways of celebrating Teachers' Day have evolved over the years. Students sometimes wash their teachers' feet, cook them food, and bring the food to their teachers' homes.
But this year's Teachers' Day will not be celebrated like the years gone by. There'll be no celebratory events as a mark of respect to the victims of Sewolho ferry disaster. For the first time, all commemorative events have been cancelled, and the week has been designated as a week for mourning. In light of the disaster, the Education Ministry has banned mass school field trips until at least June, and the teachers are calling for proactive steps to ensure the safety of students nationwide.
We urge the government to step up safety training for the students and also to better train the teachers so they are all capable of handling emergency situations.
Some schools have scheduled special safety sessions for students on this Teachers' Day, while others have organized visits to a memorial altar in Ansan that has been set up for the ferry disaster victims. 송지선, Arirang News.
On a different note, have you ever wondered how Korean dramas become popular in countries that don't speak the Korean language? Well, there are a number of reasons, one of them being an annual exhibition dedicated to spreading Korean broadcasting content worldwide. This year's event has just opened. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports from Korea's southeastern city of Busan.
From TV dramas and documentaries to animations, Asia's largest test market of broadcasting contents opened in Korea's southern port city of Busan on Thursday. The 8th International Busan Contents Market 2014 is being held under the theme of New Contents, New Network. Around 1,200 buyers and sellers registered in advance for the event. They're being joined by some 500 firms from more than 46 countries. Providers of broadcasting contents from Taiwan and Colombia are taking part in the international event for the first time.
For us, I think it's very important because it's growing a lot over the years. So it's not only like we meet with broadcasters from Korea, but we're meeting with broadcasters and producers from all over Asia. So for us, it's great. It's a great opportunity to kind of expand ourselves even more.
But this is about more than just business. Academic seminars on policies for mobile and ultra-high-definition TV contents were held. Various experts and specialists shared their views on finding ways for broadcasting contents old and new to thrive in this new digital age. Korea's one and only English broadcasting station, Arirang TV, participated in the event, releasing its new program for the year. The 3-day event runs until Saturday. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News, Busan.
Well, today was a rather cool day here in the nation's capital compared to yesterday. But what about for the rest of the week? Well, let's go over to Michelle Park for a check on the weather conditions. Michelle.
Good evening, guys. It was a sunny day here in the nation's capital, but it was also a bit windy as well.
And if I'm not mistaken, a dry weather advisory in some regions, right?
That's right, and that mainly applies to Gangwon province, where a strong wind advisory is also in effect, so be careful not to start any forest fires. Now, tomorrow, sunny skies are forecast nationwide, with highs in some areas rising all the way up to 30 degrees. Now, tomorrow, summer-like temperatures will be back in the southern parts of the nation, while the rest of the nation can expect average seasonal temperatures into the mid-20s. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul starts off the morning at 12 before reaching up to 26 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 30 and 26 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 25, Dokdo at 19, while Mangkungang tops out at 16. Now, as for the weather conditions down in Chindo, it's currently very windy and currents are very fast at a speed of 2.6 meters per second, and even stronger tides are expected from tomorrow through Sunday, which will complicate the search efforts at the ferry disaster site. Well, that's all I have at this moment. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that's the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. For our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening. This has been Daniel Chang.
And I'm Moon Gan-young. To those of you in other parts of the world, have a great start to your day. We hope to see you right back here same time tomorrow. And in light of the Teachers' Day, a big thank you from all of us here at Arirang TV to all those teachers out there. Take care.